So good afternoon and welcome to the fall 2021 Daynard Community Lecture. Twice a year, the Daynard Distinguished Visiting Fellows Program brings nationally recognized public interest leaders to campus. These public interest leaders serve as role models for students, demonstrating how legal skills can be used effectively and creatively to make the world a better place. The fellows each deliver an address that focuses on the strategic use of law to promote public interest goals, participate in a roundtable with other prominent public interest advocates, visit classes, consult about professional opportunities for students and graduates, and meet individually with interested faculty, administrators, and students. Let's take this off for a second. We so deeply appreciate the generous support of Professor Richard Daynard and Carol Daynard, making this series possible, as well as CPAC and the Public Interest Law Scholars Program. It is my great pleasure to introduce our Fall 2021 Daynard Public Interest Visiting Fellow, Attorney Linda Y. Rivas. Attorney Rivas is Executive Director and Managing Attorney of Las Americas, Immigrant Advocacy Center, a 34-year-old organization dedicated to the legal needs of low-income migrants, including assisting asylum seekers and those in need of family reunification, as well as advocating for the dignity and rights of all migrants. I have to say, after spending some time with Linda earlier today, I'm sure we'll be well informed and inspired by her presentation and dialogue. A bit more background about Attorney Rivas. During the Trump administration, she represented and led efforts to reunite families who were separated as a result of the zero tolerance immigration policy and the Remain in Mexico policy. Recently, Attorney Rivas has advocated to end Title 42 expulsions at the border. Attorney Rivas is also the co-founder of the Borderland Immigration Council, a local Texas group of attorneys, activists, and advocacy organizations formed to help address the dire situation of due process abuses, family separation, and abuse of discretion that immigrants and refugees face during the course of their legal immigration cases. Attorney Rivas was born in Mexico and raised in El Paso, Texas from the age of 4. She attended the University of Texas at El Paso and completed her studies with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and with a minor in Legal Reasoning. She earned her JD at Loyola College of Law in New Orleans. During law school, Attorney Rivas clerked with the U.S. Department of Justice Executive Office of Immigration Review. At the beginning of her career, Attorney Rivas advocated for children in the child welfare system as an attorney ad litem. She went on to become West Texas Violence Against Women's Act manager for the Texas Civil Rights Project in El Paso. Her work is often featured in the Washington Post, NPR, PBS, Texas Tribune, and the New York Times. We're so incredibly pleased to have Attorney Rivas here today. Along with today's community lecture, we hope you'll join her and her colleagues for a roundtable entitled, I Would Still Have Come, a conversation with experts and directly impacted migrant women about the impact of border policies on their lives. This Wednesday, October 6th at 12:45. And now I will turn it over to our Daynard Distinguished Fellow, Linda Rivas, for her lecture entitled Border Cruelty, a day-to-day look at immigration law on the border. Linda?
Thank you so much, Dean Hackney. I really appreciate that wonderful intro. Sorry for awkwardly standing next to you while you introduced me, but it worked out. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to keep my mask on. I typically keep my mask on for presentations when I'm in Ciudad Juarez with other folks, so I'm just used to it. I'm used to presenting with a mask on. My name is Linda Rivas. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am very proud to say that I am an immigrant. And it took me a while to be proud and say it. Mostly because my journey looks different from some of the people that I serve, but I am still an immigrant. I still remember leaving at the age of 4. I remember the memory of leaving that country behind, of Mexico. I remember my naturalization ceremony. Some of you all may have had that experience as well, where I remember receiving a little American flag. I remember crying to my parents, thinking that it meant I could no longer speak Spanish because I was 6 years old when that happened. And I also recognized the deep privilege that I was able to access naturalization at the age of 6 because my mother was from El Paso, Texas, and understood what she needed to do and how important it was for me to have citizenship rights. Sadly, I meet people now that are my age and their parents did not have the foresight, the education, the money to do so, and they actually are still trying to fight to prove that they are citizens acquired by birth. Sadly, when we think of that, I'm saying this for a reason, but Ted Cruz ran on acquired citizenship, even though he was not born in the United States. So many people, that are acquired citizens just like him, have zero rights. And we live in El Paso. We live in a militarized zone that is surrounded by checkpoints. And if you cannot prove that you are a citizen, you cannot leave. So if you're uncertain of your citizenship or you've never been able to have the papers of your citizenship, you cannot leave, even though you are technically by law a citizen. And of course, those who don't have the privilege of citizenship at all are trapped there as well. We live in a very over-militarized border. It's where I practice law every day. It is kind of mind-boggling and jarring to practice law in such a militarized zone, 100 miles of the border where so many due process rights go to die. So that's a little bit of my story. I am a proud immigrant, and I say that as part of my story. And if that is a part of your story, say it proudly, because I think it helps others, and I think it is part of our representation. Now, I work in an organization that Dean Hagney did such a great job of describing, Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center in El Paso, Texas, and we are now in Ciudad Juarez. And when I was in law school and I was in your all's shoes, I could have truly never imagined that my goal, my dream of becoming an American immigration lawyer would suddenly need for me to have my feet firmly planted in Ciudad Juarez almost every single day to represent asylum seekers. And slowly, or actually not so slowly, but suddenly we have seen the great erosion of asylum in our country to the point where right now, it is practically non-existent. The images that are seared in our minds from about a week and a half ago from Del Rio of our Haitian siblings who were coming here for a better life, whether or not they were asylum seekers, that is not to be disputed. They did not deserve that treatment. And, I bring this up because it's extremely important, to talk about where we are now. And that is what Title 42 equals. The government created that crisis because they did not respond. They created that crisis because they continue to lean on externalizing asylum to the country of Mexico, my country, that has so much less resources to take care of asylum seekers. But this current administration has flown on bilateral flights hundreds of people, first to the northern border, and then they decided, oh no, too many people are coming right back. And they're taking that risk again. They're risking their lives to come to this country. So guess what? Now they fly them to the southern border. They fly them to the southern border of Mexico and Guatemala. And under Trump, we called that the ACA. We called that the third country agreements. And they were highly illegal, and the ACLU sued. We were one of the plaintiffs. Las Americas was one of the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. Now the Biden administration is doing it. They're calling it something different, and they're not even giving the guise of due process. They're just flying people to the southern border of Mexico and Guatemala. The externalization of asylum is the reality now in the work of border lawyers and people that are in border justice work. We can no longer solely be practitioners in the United States. So that is why Las Americas is now proudly in El Paso, Texas, and we are sadly also in Ciudad Juarez, because we need to be. Because this current administration, the government as a whole, has showed zero commitment to stopping the externalization of asylum and keeping it in Mexico. And it's funny because people talk about it now like, well, what do you want us to do? What is the capacity? I mean, we get to be on meetings with White House officials. I got to sit with the Vice President Kamala Harris in June after she told people not to come. It was a hard meeting to be in. A privilege of a lifetime. I'm not going to say that it wasn't. But it was a hard meeting to be in. And you know what? The funny thing is, I'll tell you all, she really got it. She understands why people come. But she still made those comments, and this administration is still not responsive. Because they seem to fail to remember a world where we did not externalize asylum the way we do now. What exactly I mean by externalization is we are not accepting asylum seekers to knock at the door. I used to give this presentation to university students, to our interns. And the first thing I would say is, there's two types of asylum. If you're already in the country, maybe you came in through a visa, maybe you came in irregularly. Just remember, as university students, as law students, take the illegal framework out. I don't think I should have to say we don't call people illegal. I think that's ingrained. But the way people enter, we still use that phrasing. And so right now we are using the term irregularly. So people can come in irregularly. Sometimes that means through very tumultuous mountain, desert, river. Often that journey can be deadly. And so it's irregular crossings. So you could be in the country through an irregular crossing, you were undetected, and you're seeking asylum. Or you were detected, you turned yourself into Border Patrol. This is what we saw a lot. I started practicing in 2014 at Las Americas, and a little before that at the Texas Civil Rights Project. And this is what we would see. People would turn themselves in at the border. They were very proud of the fact they did not see themselves as committing any crime. Legally, you may step on the soil of the United States, and it doesn't matter how you got on that soil, you have the right to seek asylum. So we had asylum seekers, oftentimes, if they were individuals that did not come with their own children, they were detained. That still happens today, but now the government has different options. They can detain them, they can send them right back to Mexico, they could fly them to the southern border of Guatemala. But back then, it was detention for single people. Some families would be released, oftentimes with ankle monitors. Many times under the Obama administration, we saw fathers often separated from the mothers and the children. And the mothers and the children could go on, access the legal system, go to immigration court, but the father would be stuck in detention. And guess what? When you're in detention, your court goes a lot quicker, and you're deported a lot faster. This form of family separation was happening for quite a while, and no one really cared to talk about it. The government was creating single-family households, not by the choice of the family that came, but by the choice of the government. That was a horror that a lot of folks don't even know what's going on. The other really horrible thing, and I'm not saying this is ideal, but the sad thing is when you're working on the border and you're working with cruelty, you start to accept that certain really bad things that were happening under Obama were still better than this. It's a terrible place to be in your mind, and you have to somehow learn to reconcile it, but it was better than the externalization of asylum by far. So we had some families would go into what they were called residential centers, residential family centers. They were detention centers. We called them baby jails. We protested them. You know, a couple hundred of people, not the protests that thankfully we saw for family separation. Family separation was absolutely horrible, but I will give it one thing. It awoke our consciousness here in this country, and it woke people up to the need for legal representation of newly arrived immigrants and refugees. And I don't believe that existed because I was working in this world, and I could not convince anybody to give us a single dime to be an attorney for an immigrant. But that changed after family separation. But anyway, just kind of backtracking a little bit before family separation, we had baby jails. Then I remember learning about them through people who were doing the work directly. I was barely getting into my position at Las Americas, and there was bedtimes, and there was bed assignments for babies. I'm a mom. I think my now 10-year-old still sometimes sleeps in bed with me, but for the most part, I got him out of my bed at 6 years old. But they had 2-year-olds assigned to a bed. And if they were not in that bed, the guards had to move them to that bed because it was jail. That happened under the Obama administration. Now, the family comes in, and during MPP, or Migrant Protection Protocol, which was a really confusing term the government gave so that we wouldn't really know what was happening. And so we always try and remember to call it Remain in Mexico. Remain in Mexico meant you would come into the country, oftentimes irregularly, asked 0 questions, and escorted right back to Mexico and given a court date with all your paperwork in English, with very little people to explain how important it was for you to present in court and go to the bridge. So many people were immediately kidnapped the minute that they stepped foot into Mexico. They were kidnapped by the taxi driver immediately. They were, people knew. People knew they were migrants. They knew they had been rendered vulnerable. I try and change the framing there. The people who seek a better life and safety and protection and save their families' lives are the bravest and most courageous people you will ever know. It is an honor for me to work with them every single day. But they have been rendered vulnerable by several governments. By the government that refused to protect them in the first place and the reason they had to flee. And then by those third countries where corruption and the coyotes and the criminal entities flourish on their backs with their hard-earned savings. And then they get to the United States and they're sent right back immediately with little to no explanation and told to access a court system, although they have 0 clue what's going on and no attorney help. I was literally the first, I don't like to brag, but I'm just telling you this because it's important for context. Little old me was the first person in Ciudad Juarez to say, here I am, I'm here to represent the MPP folks in Ciudad Juarez. There was 70,000 individuals returned under Remain in Mexico. 70,000, and Tijuana was already doing their thing, and they have great groups out there, like Otro Lado, IMDEF, Haitian Bridge Alliance. I'm giving the shout out for these amazing orgs that are out there. Then MPP hit Ciudad Juarez. And somebody said, hey, is Las Americas going to do MPP? And gosh, I said, I couldn't even fathom a world where we would have to be in Mexico almost every single day to do our job. So I said, I don't know. I will answer the call because that's what we do. We answer the call. And sure enough, we got the call. That day, we actually had 100 phone calls coming in from family members that either didn't know where their family was, or assumed they may have already been returned to Mexico, or had heard from their families once and understood that they were in Mexico. And that was how Remain in Mexico got started. Well, let's fast forward to the pandemic, March 2020. I think we all haven't even truly processed March 2020 yet, right? We're kind of barely kind of barely coming back and feeling human again. March 2020, the United States decides, under the order of a CDC, Title 42, that they will no longer process asylum seekers. I immediately called it the weaponization of COVID-19 against migrants. And the Trump administration getting exactly what they had wanted to do since their campaign promising in 2016. The border is shut. Under Title 19, our binational, bicultural communities also took a major hit. Because not only were asylum seekers and those seeking protection and better lives not allowed to step foot into the United States, but our border crossing was deemed non-essential, unless you were a citizen or a resident. So the border is still open to citizens and residents who carry a lot of privilege. But those with visitor visas, okay, many of those with visitor visas do not have the ability, the money, the access to the type of education that warrants a student visa. And they can't access high school right now. They can't access certain things because they don't have the visa, or they can't access their families, their jobs. It's a big hit for us as bicultural communities. And again, the weaponization of our communities, of our culture, because of COVID-19. So you fast forward to now, El Paso and many border cities actually have very high vaccination rates. The El Paso County judge has made an agreement with Ciudad Juarez. Let me contextualize the border for 1 minute. I could be sitting at my university. We don't have a law school, but we have the University of Texas at El Paso, which is UTEP. I could be sitting at my school, hop in my car, however long that takes me to walk to my car. We're a big commuter school, so there's a lot of vehicles and parking and all sorts of stuff. So walk to my car, and I could probably get to Mexico faster than it took me to get from my seat to my car. About a 5-minute drive. Typically no line to enter into Mexico, but typically a line to come back. And you know, once you're, I call myself a fronteriza, which means a border person, frontericex, very proudly. You know what times to cross the border. So the border is so extremely close. So you reach now, so that's our border. Our county judge agreed with Ciudad Juarez, our border community 5 minutes away from us, to actually export vaccines to them. We have 75% vaccination rate in El Paso, which for being a Texas city, a Texas county, is a really big deal. And we're now at booster shots. This country is now at the privilege of booster shots. But we still have our border closed off. And let me explain to you who the government thinks Title 42 protects. The border agents. It's those same border agents that refuse to wear masks. The same border agents who refuse to get vaccinated and who are upset about the federal vaccine mandate. But even if it did keep them safe, they're failing. They fail to use basic mitigation, which even your university, right, has gotten really good at. You know, thankfully, and we've all, I think as a community, we've now understand how to protect ourselves against this virus in ways that we did not prior, right? So why are we still using Title 42? And this is what Title 42 is. Still to this day, literally, a family could be seeking the path of least resistance where the coyote is going to take them, okay? The family may scale the wall, a lot of injuries. I have so the family, let's say, with or without injury, El Paso, Texas, a Border Patrol agent will see that they have crossed over irregularly. They will go and they will, instead of processing them, instead of asking them, what is your purpose in this country? Do you fear returning to your country? Do you have a fear of returning to Mexico? Okay, let's pretend that these people are Central American, okay? Do you have a fear of returning to Mexico? Border Patrol, because of the dozens and dozens and dozens of people and the hundreds of people that I've interviewed in my career, Border Patrol typically does not ask a single question. Border Patrol often lies on the legal documents that they turn into their attorneys, which is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, our opposing counsel. And I've had false documents. I've had Border Patrol do a crappy copy-paste job on these documents. But now they don't even have to do that with Title 42. Now they say, no, you can't. They don't even tell people, here's the worst part. Sometimes they don't even tell people that they're being expelled. They say, here, get into this van. We're taking you somewhere better. I've heard them say, we're taking you to a shelter. I've heard them say, we're taking you to a judge. And you can tell the judge your story because I don't want to hear it. I'm not the judge. But then they'll find themselves taking them right to the border and escorting them. I have seen with my own eyes, just as, not even as just an immigration attorney or Las Americas, just a driver driving back from my duties in Juarez, see Border Patrol escorting about 100 people that just tried to cross over or maybe had crossed earlier that morning. Children, babies in arms. I've seen a man expelled in a wheelchair with a recent injury. In Palomas, New Mexico, something we have been fighting with, Palomas, Chihuahua, which is borders New Mexico. We've actually been alerting the US government and CBP higher-ups that people are sent back actively bleeding after injuring themselves at that border crossing. But Title 42 does not stop. Now, the externalization of asylum also means that the United States has to pay attention to what Mexico wants. And I will say this, the Biden administration cares a little bit more than the Trump administration did about what Mexico wants. Oftentimes, Mexico, under the Trump administration, felt very threatened. I went to a federal shelter in Mexico one day, and they had this military kitchen set up. This is the same military kitchen that actually helped out in Katrina. Those Mexican military agents or soldiers came in after Katrina and were preparing meals, and they would make these tortillas from scratch. They were preparing meals. So this same setup happens for refugee reception. And it's problematic because I think that anytime you have little to no accountability of government agencies, it's going to be problematic. And so that has not been ideal. But at the moment I was there, I felt a sense of pride because we were under the Trump administration, and the Trump administration, was just sending people back to Mexico with nothing. I had met so many mothers and fathers that had been kidnapped, that had been raped. I cannot tell you that it will never escape my mind meeting mothers who were sexually assaulted in front of their children because of Remain in Mexico. So when I went to the shelter, I felt a sense of relief to see that there was this huge humanitarian effort with this fancy military kitchen, and that meals would be made, and that there was cots that had come in from Mexico City that were all the way up to the ceiling of a warehouse for reception to welcome people, to give them a place to rest their head. So I told this Mexican government official that was giving us a tour, I said, I'm proud of being Mexicana. I know, I'm proud of your efforts. And he said to me, we did it with a gun against our head because I was under Trump. Now, the Biden administration, I think, is having better negotiations with the Mexican government, and the Mexican government has stepped up a little bit more to say, no, basta. And a particular state government of Coahuila decided to tell Mexico, no, you are not going to expel when a family has a child under, I don't remember what age they gave, maybe 10, I don't know. Both governments use such arbitrary numbers of when they render a child to be vulnerable, so they won't return them. So what happens is when Mexico tells CBP, and we don't even know how that conversation took place, but suddenly there was no more expulsions of families with children of a certain age in parts of southern Texas, which meant all the people that have been essentially stranded in Mexico because of Title 42 saw that there was a path of least resistance. The coyotes saw that there was a path of least resistance because, again, Title 42 puts the power in the hands of criminal entities like coyotes who are looking out to see where is the path of least resistance, where can we get people through. Title 42 makes them sell endless passes, telling the family, you can cross as many times as you want. Title 42 creates the chaos and the mess and the crisis and the exact optics that very conservative, anti-immigrant folks want to see because they want to see this administration fail. So suddenly CBP cares about what Mexico wants. After a full Trump administration where they did it. The Mexican government also had told the Trump administration, don't send back pregnant women. Don't send back anybody who identifies as LGBTQ. Don't send back sick people. Don't send back people who have trouble communicating in Spanish because Mexico is a Spanish-speaking country. But they sent back Brazilians. They sent back so many indigenous speakers. It was ridiculous. They sent back pregnant people, visibly pregnant people. Do not be surprised to learn that Border Patrol has very likely sent back people in active labor. They weren't paying attention, but suddenly this particular situation in South Texas, CBP decides to listen. Decides to listen to the Mexican government. So some families are not expelled under Title 42, but some are. Because guess what they say? They say, okay, you can't enter on this side of the border. So come in. I'm going to put you on this flight. CBP refuses to test anybody for COVID, even though this whole thing is about COVID safety, right? Title 42 is a CDC order. But they put everybody on the same flight, fly them to San Diego, expel half of the plane to Tijuana, fly them to El Paso, expel half of the plane to Ciudad Juarez. What happens to the other half? About 30 folks go to shelters. Shelter spaces in El Paso, shelter spaces along the border. We work in conjunction with other border orgs more than we ever have before. It's been great. There's a lot more collaboration on the border right now, which is really wonderful. And guess what we've been telling the Biden administration since December? Since we knew they were going to be the Biden administration and they had a transition team. We are ready to welcome. We have room, we have capacity. Stop expelling people, stop the externalization of asylum. In Title 42, we can welcome. Welcome with dignity. It became our slogan. It's what we've been doing for years, and then suddenly we branded it, hoping that it would again take the public consciousness to say, okay, this is what we have to do. Sadly, the Biden administration has not has yet to end Title 42. And going back to Del Rio, that is a consequence of Title 42 still existing. Because nobody can walk up to the border, just to also illustrate it for you. Nobody can walk up to the border agent. So this is how literally the lines work, how arbitrary it is. The line is drawn, this is the entry between Mexico. There's a border agent right here. And unless I show my expired passport, I lost my passport during the pandemic. Long story. But I show my expired passport, literally, all I have to do is show this. And you can see here, has a little hole in it because it's already been processed and they gave me a new one. I show this and I can keep on walking into the United States. If nobody has something to show, if somebody does not have anything to show, agents, right away, they rough up. And they start to speak to them. Usually, they speak Spanish. What is your purpose? What do you need here? Where are your papers? Where are your documents? Some visitors are saying, I need to go to my kid's graduation. And they say, okay, show me. Okay, you can go talk to the officer over there. And they put him in an office. But an asylum seeker or an asylum seeking family comes and they say, no, I'm sorry, the border is closed. They say, no, I'm sorry, there is no asylum. You need to turn back. The agents being propped up in the middle of the bridge at the line between the US and Mexico is new. It's not normal. And it has been happening since about 2017, the beginning of the Trump administration. It's my understanding that in Tijuana, it was happening earlier than that. It was happening towards the end of the Obama administration. And it started with Haitians. It started with the racist rhetoric of needing to keep Haitians out. And it continues to this day. So nobody is able to say, but here's all my evidence. Aquí está mi evidencia. Me trataron de matar. Sometimes people's evidence is on their bodies and they're showing gunshot wounds. And they will not let them. The border is closed. People's only option, and what the externalization of asylum means, is that the only option is you risk your life, you risk your dignity, you risk everything, and you're wading in a river in Del Rio, trying to get edible food for your family, and coming back, and I don't even, it's so traumatic, I don't even want to talk about what those people went through, but that is what Title 42 is. That is the externalization of asylum. And in law, we were here, this is a law school class, so let me talk to you a little bit about how this relates to law and policy. The metering list, 2017. Metering started, and people were, again, at the top of the bridge asking for papers. Has been deemed illegal in the metering case with Al Otro Lado. We are still waiting. Actually, this week, there should be something coming from the judge because both parties needed to present what they wanted this to look like on the ground. Will the Biden administration and CBP be forced to stop that practice and start letting people present at a port of entry, which is safer, which is more dignified, which should have never stopped? That's one piece of litigation. The other one is Wisha. That's Huisha. Wisha is the big litigation in Title 42, where a federal judge also deemed that Title 42 is illegal. Border Patrol fails to take basic COVID mitigation protocols. They don't even do the bare minimum. And Title 42 is illegal because seeking asylum is legal. It's part of the law, and we haven't been doing it under the guise of public safety and public health. Wisha, unfortunately, it was very disheartening to see the Biden administration fight that case, appeal it, see those DOJ resources. Their stay of enacting the order to end Title 42 was granted. We will not see an end of Title 42 until, well, we won't know until January. But for the foreseeable future, Title 42 is in place. It is a policy in place and it stands. And we have very little to no legal way to get people out of Mexico. We are using humanitarian parole. Humanitarian parole is in the INA 212D5. I don't memorize a lot of things, but that one I have memorized. 212D5 is humanitarian parole. At any given moment, agents, the government has the discretion to allow people in based on significant public interest or urgent humanitarian need. We are pushing parole, and guess what our CBP director tells us? We have no authority to give you Title 42. I'm sorry, we have no authority to give you humanitarian parole. Title 42 stands, but we've gotten lucky, and I don't know how long that'll last. They now say we will exempt a person from Title 42 and put them into Title 8, which is regular immigration proceedings. Okay. So we're seeing some success there. Now, let me explain to you something that you all maybe saw a little bit of chattering on the news, but it was kind of difficult to understand. The government actually created what they called a consortium. The consortium was a group of nonprofits that they handpicked. It did not include us. It didn't include any of the rabble-rousers. It included some bigger, internationally recognized nonprofits. HIAS is one of them. HIAS is a really great partner. I love the work that HIAS does. Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, for those who may not be familiar with HIAS. Highest was chosen KIND, which is for representation of kids in need of legal defense. And there were a few other orgs. I won't go into them, but what essentially the government created was, they say, okay, we listened and we're concerned too. We understand that there are vulnerable individuals, maybe very sick people who have been displaced for several years now and have nothing, people who have been victims of violence that need to enter into the United States to save their own lives. And we recognize that. So the government has recognized it. So they created a consortium, and the consortium was meant essentially to do the government's work. Sadly, the consortium was one of the most dangerous times for my staff and myself than ever before. And we've been walking into Mexico since 2019, recognizing that there was a huge risk in doing so. But the consortium, what the consortium was, long story short, was the nonprofits identified the vulnerable families. The nonprofits got all the information from the vulnerable families for CBP, saying, well, this way CBP doesn't keep people too long in detention. You give us all their info. Us handing over nonprofits sensitive biographical information to the government, because this is the only way to get a family into the United States. And there was a limit. There was a cap of how many people could come in per day. And this was border-wide. The effort was border-wide. At the end of the effort, it is estimated about 10,000 people, not families, 10,000 people got through in a span of 4 months. Do you know how many times criminal entities, coyotes, cartels, imitated our fellow nonprofits to extortion people, to extort them, to potentially kidnap them, because they created this system that the government was hands off and didn't want to do it, but said, here, nonprofits, you guys care so much, you do it. We stopped doing it. We were partners with Highest. Highest and IRC was another partner. They stopped doing it July 31st because the government had said that July was this goal to potentially end Title 42. But Title 42 was not ended, sadly. We could not, so, and here's another thing important. In the Wisha litigation, the government gave a declaration, and it's public, you all can see it, where it says, oh, but we created a consortium, and we have nonprofit partners, so they use it against us to say, we have gotten 10,000 vulnerable people in, so Title 42 can stay, because look, we have this little path in for people, which is absolutely not right, and it forces us in the nonprofit world, in the immigration representation world, to aim for harm reduction instead of trying to change this horrible policy and system of Title 42. So something that we did as kind of unspoken, but the nonprofits are not agreeing to become another consortium. We are not agreeing to use CBP-1. You can look up the problematic nature of CBP-1. Privacy concerns, of course, for us as lawyers, meaningful and important and should not be tolerated. But what does that mean? It means, one of my colleagues described it as she felt she was running a Schindler's List. And it was very painful because the only people that could access the consortium were people who were lucky enough to get through our phone lines. We were having about upwards of 300 phone calls a day. We're a small nonprofit. We have 20 paid staff. 2 of those are receptionists. 4 lines. Luckily, we were not the only referring partner, but we were really the main one. So some people would get in, some people wouldn't. We were not the only people doing this on the border. All the nonprofits, there was many volunteers. Maybe some of you were a part of the efforts, because they definitely called on college students to help with the volunteering, and definitely law students. So 10,000 people, but they used it against us in the litigation. So what happens now is something that we've had to sit with the staff and say, okay, well, like I said, we have humanitarian parole. We're going to continue to push it. We probably will not get 10,000 people in the next 4 months, but we hope that we stand our ground, that this administration understands that Title 42 needs to end. The externalization of asylum was not the norm. It was never the norm until the Trump administration made it the norm. So I want to switch gears and talk some about, quickly, the detention work. And the reason I want to talk about the detention work is because the detention work is everywhere. And the detention work is less sexy and glamorous than some of this talking about going into Mexico and representing folks, family separation. Again, not to be callous, these are all really horrible things. The detention work gets very little, very little airtime. Detention work is crucial. If you all are planning to go into immigration work, you probably need to start in detention and represent the siblings who are detained. They could be people who were ripped out of your own communities from taking their children to school, to people who maybe entered in the El Paso border and were flown to one of the detention centers up here, detention centers in the South, one of the worst detention centers. El Paso's one of them. The detention centers in Georgia, the detention centers where the forced sterilizations were taking place. That's detention work. Detention work is really crucial. In our detention work, our director of legal services, who is, just an amazing hero in everything she does, discovered very credible allegations of sexual assault happening in our detention center. A detention center that, frankly, we worked in since we were baby lawyers, happening by the guards, the contracted guards. Again, that didn't get a lot of, sadly, sexual assault of migrant women gets very little media attention. This happens so often. It's really, really sad. Detention work is crucial. Detention work is a really great place to show off your lawyering skills, because maybe you will not be called a litigator, but it is what you are doing before the immigration judge almost on a daily basis. It's a pretty grueling pace. Bond hearings, very, very important. Bond hearings. Right now, since people cannot come into the country in the way that we talked about, right? They can't present at the port of entry. The only person who has the ability to get the person out of detention is going to be the immigration judge. The difference is that there was a litigation, there was a lawsuit called Fryhat. It was spearheaded by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Fryhat was a very, very powerful tool to get people out of detention when COVID was literally on fire at every single ICE detention center in the country. Fryhat allows for ICE to let people out of detention, but sadly, since the Biden administration, and again, they only use COVID getting better and mitigation factors when it's to their convenience. Because now that they know how to control COVID, they're vaccinating people in the detention centers, detention numbers keep creeping up and up and up and up and up. I only have a little bit more time, so I just want to say something. Talking about harm reduction, talking about this stance we took as border orgs. Remember, I don't have the answer here, but remember, we often find ourselves wanting to do harm reduction work, but also needing to change harmful, cruel systems. And it's just something that should always be at the top of your mind when you are representing. Instead of helping and thinking you want to be the helper, how can you be a part of a person's journey of empowerment? I told a student, all of y'all have been great, those that I have had the pleasure to meet with. I told a student that now, as I get a little bit more mature as a lawyer, I actually accept the Facebook friend requests of my clients and my former clients. And a lot of them have come through El Paso. They were welcomed in El Paso, and then they come and they join places like your beautiful community. And to see them thrive reminds me they were not vulnerable to begin with. This is what I wish people could see in the media. I've had some of my clients become TikTok stars and TikTok creators, and I love it. I see them travel. I see them go to Disneyland, Disney World for the first time, and it just, oh my God, it makes me so excited. I see them starting businesses. I see them on vacations with their family and taking family photos, and it reminds me I was a small, tiny part. I did not save them. I was a part of their journey in empowerment and restoring of dignity. That's what we do at the border. We restore dignity, we welcome with dignity. And just to tell you all who will hopefully be scattered all around the country doing amazing work, something super important. The work doesn't end at the border. And it does not all have to happen at the border. We need that welcome with dignity, and we need those support systems to continue for these families for years to come. Because these families fall through the cracks often because sometimes there is no reception. Sometimes there's the overworked, underfunded nonprofit that has not had the flash in the news, like, frankly, like we have, to say, hey, this is the work that we're doing, and they need the representation once they get to Boston, once they get to Miami, once they get to New York. And New York has a universal representation system, and that's what we all should be trying to model, and having local governments also support that is very, very important, and you can be part of that advocacy work. And that's an example of the structural change versus the individual harm reduction, which both have an important role. So, man, I could go on and on, but let's turn it over to some questions. I think it's about time to go to questions.